Welcome to This is Thailand. If you've been here a while, you know what we do. We sit down with the people who came to this country chasing something, love, a second start, a reason to feel alive again, and we let them tell you what happened. Some of those stories end with a bar tab and a broken heart. Some end with an empty bank account and a one-way flight home. And some, the ones that stay with you, the ones you think about on the drive to work, some of them are harder to categorize than that. This is one of those. His name is Brendan. He's 51 years old, from a small town in County Leitrim in the northwest of Ireland, and he spent the better part of 3 decades working underground in the last coal mine in the country. He's not a flashy man, not a reckless man. Not, by any measure you'd look at him, the kind of man you'd expect to end up sitting across from a camera in northern Thailand telling a story like this one. He didn't come here for the nightlife. He didn't come here for the nightlife. He didn't come here chasing 20-year-olds on Bangla Road. He came here because his life had been taken apart piece by piece, and he was trying, quietly and carefully, to build something new. He thought he'd found it. He thought, for the first time in a long time, that things were going the right direction. This one is going to stick with you. Here's his story, in his own words. I'll start before Thailand, because you need to understand who I was before any of this. Otherwise, none of it makes sense. Or maybe it makes too much sense. I don't know. I grew up in Leitrim. That's in the west of Ireland, up near the border, the kind of county people drive through on their way somewhere else. I started at Rigna when I was 22. That's the coal mine, last one in Ireland. It's a heritage site now. People pay to go in and have a look around. I spent 28 years in there, and now tourists take photographs of it, which is the sort of thing you either find funny or you don't, depending on what kind of day you're having. Working underground changes how you think. I don't mean in any poetic way. I mean practically. When you spend enough time in a place where the wrong decision kills you or the man beside you, you get very slow about making decisions. You get very careful about what you trust. You read the roof. You listen to the sounds the tunnel makes. You learn that most things are telling you something. If you're paying attention, the mine closed. That was 1990. I was 50 by the time everything I'm going to tell you happened, so there was a long gap in between. Laboring work, groundworks, a bit of demolition, whatever kept me moving. It was never as good as the mine, not because the mine was glamorous, it wasn't, but because underground you knew exactly who you were. Outside of it, I was just another lad with a hard hat and a flask, interchangeable with anyone else on the site. I married Siobhan in 1997. She was from Roscommon, which is the next county over. Good woman, I thought. We managed all right for a long time, or I thought we were managing all right. Turns out she had a different version of events running alongside mine the whole time, and her version involved a list of my failings that she'd been keeping since roughly the turn of the millennium. I won't go into all of it, there's no point. The short version is that she left, and when she did, she took the house in Carrick-on-Shannon, what was left in the joint account, and the border collie. The dog's name was Mossy. I still think about Mossy. My solicitor said sign. I signed. That's the kind of man I am, not passive, exactly. More like someone who's assessed the situation and decided that fighting it will cost more than it's worth. Underground, you learn to pick what you die on. That wasn't the hill. So there I was, 50 years old, renting a box room above a chipper in Boyle. And if you don't know Boyle, it's a perfectly fine town, nothing wrong with it. But it's not somewhere you want to be living above a chipper at 50 with nothing to your name, and the smell of chipper at 50 with nothing to your name, and the smell of chips following you into your dreams. It's the sort of situation that's hard to explain to people who haven't been in it. It wasn't despair. It was more like nothing. The absence of anything in particular. I'd get up, I'd go to whatever site I was working, I'd come back, I'd eat, I'd lie in the dark and listen to the chipper close at 11:30. That was it. That was the whole of it. Then my Uncle Packy died. Packy was my mother's brother, a bachelor farmer from up near Ballyfarnan who never spent money on anything, if he could avoid it, and apparently had been saving quietly for 50 years without telling a soul. He left me 25,000. I want to be clear about what that number meant to a man in my situation. It wasn't rich. I wasn't suddenly wealthy. But it was more money than I'd ever had access to at one time in my life. And for a man who'd been living on laboring wages in a box room, it was genuinely incomprehensible. I didn't do anything with it for months. I just left it in the account and tried to understand what I was supposed to feel about it. I didn't tell Siobhan. She'd already signed and gone by then. It had nothing to do with her. I tell people that, and sometimes they look at me like I'm being clever, but it wasn't cleverness. It was just the truth. She was gone. It was mine. And I sat with it, this enormous, strange number, and tried to figure out what a man like me was supposed to do when he suddenly had options. I'd never really had options before. You grow up in Leitrim, you work with what's in front of you. The mine was in front of me. Siobhan was in front of me. The box room was in front of me. Dotavant. The box room was in front of me. None of it was chosen in any real sense. It was just the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing after that. So the money wasn't exciting, not the way you might think. It was more like standing in a corridor and realizing for the first time that there are doors, and you've no idea which one's open or what's behind them. That's not a great feeling, actually. That's quite a frightening feeling when you're not used to it. I was 50 years old. I had 105,000 and a box room and no collie. Something had to change. There was a lad called Declan I worked with for about 2 years on a groundworks contract outside Strokestown. Quiet enough fella, kept himself to himself, which I respected. But every single lunch break, without fail, he'd get out his phone and show you something from Thailand. A plate of food, a beach, a street market with colored lights. He did 2 winters there after the contract ended, and when he came back he looked 10 years younger, which I found annoying because he was already younger than me. I half listened to all of it. The cheap living, the weather, the food, the people. I also half listened to the other stories, the ones that circulate on building sites when the lads think they're being worldly. Bar girls in short-time hotels and men in their 60s making fools of themselves. I wasn't interested in any of that. That was never going to be me. I knew who I was. But the phrase he used once, I don't even think he meant anything particular by it. It just came out over a flask of tea. He said you could just start over there. Clean slate. Like it was nothing. Like starting over was a thing you could just do if you got on a plane. I didn't book flights for another 8 months after that. But the phrase stayed, and the box room got smaller. And one night in November, I sat on the edge of the single bed with the smell of chip fat coming up through the floor, and I thought, I'm 51 years old and I have money in the bank and I'm going to die in this room if I don't do something different. So I booked it. I want to be very clear about my intentions, because I think it matters for what comes later. I was not going to Thailand to find a woman. I was not going to Thailand to find a bar stool and spend Packy's money on Chang beer and company. I'd heard those stories and I thought, not unkindly, that those men had made a particular set of choices, and those choices had consequences, and none of it had anything to do with me. I was going because the arithmetic made sense. My money would last longer somewhere warm than in Connacht. I had no ties. I had nowhere to be. That was the whole of the reasoning. Bangkok hid me like a wall. I don't mean that badly. I mean it physically. You step out of Suvarnabhumi, and the heat wraps around you like something with intentions. It's not like Spanish heat, which I'd had once or twice on site holidays. It's heavier than that, wetter. And the noise, motorbikes everywhere, horns, the SkyTrain overhead, tuk-tuks threading through gaps that shouldn't exist. A smell that was food and exhaust and incense all at once, and I couldn't have separated them if you'd paid me. I stayed near Sukhumvit because that's where my guest house was, and for a week I walked around feeling like a man who'd arrived on a different planet. The temples were beautiful, I suppose, in a way I didn't have the vocabulary for. Wat Pho, I went there. All those golden Buddhas. I stood in front of the reclining one, which is enormous. I mean genuinely enormous. You don't expect it. And I thought, I have absolutely no frame of reference for any of this, and that was fine, but it meant I was moving through the whole week like a tourist in the worst sense of the word. Pointing at photographs to order food. Getting overcharged by tuk-tuks because I didn't know any better. Sweating through everything I owned. I was not unhappy. But I wasn't what Declan had described either. The man who changed that was the owner of my guest house, a Belgian called Mark who'd been in Bangkok for 22 years, and had the particular stillness of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything. We had a beer one evening, Singa, my first, which tasted of nothing much but was cold, which was enough, and I told him I wasn't sure Bangkok was for me. He said, go to Chiang Mai. Different energy, more like a town. People actually live there, he said, as opposed to just passing through. I took the overnight train north 2 days later. If Bangkok was a wall, Chiang Mai was a gate left open. That's the best I can describe it. It's a city, but it doesn't perform being a city the way Bangkok does. The old city has a moat around it, these old brick walls, and inside it's temples and small streets, and the sounds of monks in the morning if you're up early enough, which I generally was because my body hadn't sorted out the time difference. The air was cooler, just slightly, and it smelled of frangipani and incense and something frying, the mu ping on sticks that the ladies sell from little carts, pork on skewers with sweet glaze, 20 baht a go, and I ate about 8 of them on my first morning because I couldn't stop. I rented a small room near the old city walls, cheap, clean. A ceiling fan and a window that looked out onto a lane where a temple cat slept in the same spot every afternoon. I had no plans, no schedule. For a man who'd spent 30 years arriving somewhere at 7 in the morning and being told what to do until 5, that was its own kind of strange. But it was a better strange than Bangkok. About a week in, I needed food that wasn't mooping. I walked up toward Niman Road, which is where the cafes and the younger crowd are, a bit more modern, lots of coffee shops. But I turned off before I got there, down a smaller street, because there was a smell coming from somewhere that my body understood before my brain did. Garlic and something coconut, rich and deep. A restaurant, more of a shop house really. 4 tables inside and 2 out front. A handwritten menu on a board in Thai with a few things translated below in approximate English. I sat down. A woman came out from the back, 30-something, hair pulled back, an apron, not looking at me with the particular eager attention that some places give you when they see a Farang walk in. She just came out, set down a glass of water, and waited. I pointed at the board. I said I wasn't sure what things were. She said, "Khao soi. Try the khao soi." I didn't know what khao soi was. It arrived as a bowl of curried noodle soup with crispy noodles on top and a half lime on the side, and a little dish of pickled cabbage and shallots. And it was the best thing I had eaten in as long as I could genuinely remember. I'm not being romantic about it. I'm telling you what happened. I came back the next day. She brought me khao soi without asking. I came back the day after that. Same again. On the 4th day she came out, set down the bowl, and then paused. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as careful, and she said, in careful, considered English, "You have this 3 days. You like it, or you're just too polite to say." And I looked at her, this woman who had just looked at me and seen me, not a customer, not a Farang with money, just a man who might be too polite to complain, and I said, "No, I like it. I genuinely like it." She nodded once, like the matter was settled, and went back inside. I sat there with my khao soi and the ceiling fan turning overhead and a temple cat threading between the chairs outside, and I felt, for the first time since I couldn't remember when, like myself. Not a man in a box room, not a man who'd signed and lost everything. Just a man eating a bowl of soup that he actually liked, in a country he didn't understand yet, with nowhere particular to be. That was knock. That was all it took. I went back to the restaurant the next morning, and the morning after that. I want to be honest about the pace of this because I think the pace is the whole point. Nothing moved fast. Nothing felt like it was supposed to be a story. For the first couple of weeks after that 4th day conversation, we just talked. Or tried to. Her English was careful and considered, the kind of English you learn from books and practice in your head before you say it out loud. Mine was whatever comes out of a man from Leitrim who's never had to slow down his speech for anyone before in his life. Which on to speed somewhere in the middle. I learned to pause after sentences. She learned that when I said something and then went quiet, I was thinking, not finished. I learned her name properly, Nok. It means bird in Thai, she told me, which I found I liked. She was 34, widowed 3 years earlier. Her husband Sunchai had been a long-haul truck driver, which I noted because I understood what that life was. Long hours, physical risk, coming home tired. He'd been killed on the road between Lampong and Chiang Mai. A wet night, a lorry coming the wrong way. He was 32. Mali had been 4 years old. She told me this the way I'd told her about Siobhan, without drama, without fishing for sympathy. Just as information, as context for who she was now. I respected that enormously. I told her so, badly, and she looked at me for a moment and then nodded, like she was registering it. The restaurant had been her mother-in-law's originally, then passed to Nok when the older woman moved back to Lompeng. Her older sister Dao came in evenings to help. It was a small operation, honest work, nothing romantic about it. Early mornings at the market buying fresh ingredients, long hot days at the stove, late evenings cleaning down. She was not a woman with time to spare. I met Mei Li by accident. I was coming back from buying a few things at the convenience store near the old city walls, and I'd picked up a packet of biscuits, those Danish butter ones in the blue tin. You see them everywhere in Asia, because I'd had a craving for something familiar. I had too many biscuits and nowhere to put them, and when I arrived at the restaurant for lunch, Mali was there, sitting at the back table doing homework with the focused seriousness of a 7-year-old who has been told to sit still and means to do it. Nok introduced us. Maylie looked at me with the careful assessment of a child who has learned to take time with strangers. I put the tin of biscuits on the table because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with them. She looked at the tin, then looked at me, then looked at her mother. Nook said something in Thai. Maylie reached out and took one biscuit, held it with both hands, and ate it with enormous solemnity. I didn't manufacture that moment. I want to be clear about that. I just had too many biscuits. About 3 weeks after the Khao Swai conversation, I did something deliberate. I extended my tourist visa. You can do a border run to renew. Some lads drive down to the Malaysian border, others fly to Penang for the day, but the easier route from Chiang Mai is across to Laos at the Huai Zai crossing. I did that. A day trip, essentially. And when I came back into Thailand with a fresh stamp in my passport, I didn't tell myself it was because of Nok. I told myself it was because I wasn't finished here yet. The weather was good. The food was good. The food was good. The food was good. There was no reason to rush home to a box room. Then I rented a proper apartment. That was the honest tell, if I'd been paying attention to myself. Not a guest house room, an apartment near Niman monthly rate, a little kitchen, a proper bed. I told myself it was cheaper in the long run, which was true. I told myself I liked having a kitchen, which was also true. But a man doesn't rent an apartment in a foreign city for economic reasons alone. He rents it because he's decided, on some level, to stay. One Sunday, Nok showed me around a temple market near Wat Swan Dock. It wasn't framed as anything. She said she was going after the lunch service. Did I want to see it? I said yes. We walked around stalls selling amulets and silk and grilled corn and paper lanterns. And she explained things when I asked and didn't explain things when I didn't, which suited me perfectly. I bought 2 cups of Thai iced coffee from an old woman with a cart and offered her one, and she refused, not rudely, just, not yet. I noted it. I filed it away. Looking back, I filed everything away, as evidence. I was building a case without knowing I was building one. The motorbike came up about 6 weeks in. She mentioned it in passing, the way you mention something that's been quietly worrying you. The old Honda was making a noise it shouldn't. A repair would cost nearly as much as replacing it, and it was how she got to the morning market at 5 to buy the day's produce. It was not a request. I want to be precise about that. It was information, shared with a woman's matter-of-fact accounting of her practical problems. I offered. She said no. Straight away, no, it's fine. I said no. Straight away, no, it's fine. I said I'd like to. She said no again. I told her I knew what it was like to need a vehicle for work and not have a reliable one, and that it wasn't charity, it was practical. Long pause. Third no, softer this time. And then I said, and I can hear myself saying this, I said, look, I've got the money and you need it, and it's a motorbike, not a house. She accepted. And I noticed the hesitation. I noticed all 3 refusals. I sat with them afterward the way I'd sit with a piece of evidence, and I thought, a woman who wanted money would not have said no 3 times. A woman running a scheme would have made it easier than this. I decided right then and there that those 3 refusals told me everything I needed to know about her character. I transferred the equivalent of about 4,200. A Honda PCX, a decent one, reliable for the market runs. She sent me a photograph of it the day it arrived. Malie was sitting on it in her school uniform with the serious expression of someone who has been asked to pose for a photograph and is taking the responsibility very seriously. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I told myself what I tell myself now, which is that the hesitation was real. I still believe the hesitation was real. What I didn't understand then, what I understand now, sitting in a guest house in Pai, is that real hesitation and calculated hesitation can look exactly identical from the outside. And maybe they can feel identical from the inside too. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I had been in Chiang Mai for less than 2 months. I had spent Chiang Mai for less than 2 months. I had spent Chiang Mai for Packy's money. And for the first time since I'd left Ireland, I was sleeping properly. Not lying awake, not listening to the silence where the chip shop used to be. Just sleeping. That's what she gave me first, before anything else. Not love, not excitement, just the ordinary human sensation of being present in my own life again. And I cannot tell you, even now, that it wasn't worth something. By month 3, I had stopped being a visitor and started being something else. I'm not sure what the right word is. A fixture, maybe. I was at the restaurant most mornings for breakfast. She'd started making me cow tom, rice porridge with ginger and a soft-boiled egg, which I hadn't asked for and which appeared one day as if it had always been there. I was there most evenings too, not eating necessarily, just around. I'd fixed a loose shutter on the front window, reseated a gas connection in the kitchen that had been slightly off for months, replaced a cracked tile on the step outside. I wasn't being asked to do these things. I just noticed them the way I notice things, the way a man who has spent his life assessing structures for problems notices when something isn't right. I told myself this was my way of contributing without it being about money, which was true. It was also, I can see now, the behavior of a man who has decided he belongs somewhere and is quietly making himself necessary to prove it. Nak introduced me properly to her sister Dao around that time. Dao was a couple of years older, quieter than Nak, more serious, with the air of a woman who has been looking after people her whole life and doesn't expect thanks for it. She worked the restaurant in the evenings while Nak put Mei Li to bed. She was friendly to me. Polite. But I was aware, from the first time we properly sat down together over tea after the dinner service, that she was assessing me, not aggressively, just carefully. The way you look at a roof beam you're not sure about. I took this as the behavior of a protective older sister, and it probably was. I just got the direction wrong. I assumed she was checking whether I was good enough for Knock. Looking back, I think she was checking how much there was and how long it would last. I could be wrong about that. But that's how it reads to me now. The mother came into the picture around month 4. Her name was Mayu. She lived in Lampong, about 2 hours south by bus, and Nok rang her every evening after service. The same short call, the same ritual. I knew about the knee. Nok had mentioned it early on. A chronic problem. Degenerative, manageable with medication and occasional injections, but never fully gone. Her mother managed it the way my own mother had managed her bad hit for years, with stoicism and no drama and a complete refusal to ask for help until the situation had already become serious. One evening Nok was quieter than usual, and I asked what was wrong. She said her mother's knee had been worse lately, and the doctor in Lampang had recommended a specialist in Chiang Mai, which meant travel and accommodation and the specialist fees on top of the medication. She also said, very matter-of-factly, that the wet season had been bad this year, and part of the roof of the family house in Lampang needed replacing before the next rains. She wasn't asking me for anything. She was telling me about her life the way people do when they trust you enough to not pretend everything is fine. I said I'd like to meet her mother. On a video call, I meant, just to say hello. We did that the following evening. May was a small woman, gray-haired, sitting in what looked like a modest kitchen with a string of small Buddha amulets hanging near the window behind her. When Nok introduced me, she put her hands together and did a small way toward the screen, and her eyes went bright with, I don't know, something. She said something in Thai, and Nok translated it as, she says thank you for looking after me. And then Mayu looked at the screen and started crying, quietly, not making a performance of it, just crying the way old women cry when they've been managing alone for a long time and something unexpectedly kind happens. I grew up watching my mother manage a bad hip on a farm in Leitrim while raising 4 children and never once asking anyone to slow down for her. I know what that kind of stoicism costs. I know what it looks like when it finally cracks, just slightly, at the edges. I offered before Nok asked me to. I want to be honest about that. I said I'd like to help with the specialist and with the roof. Nok said no, she couldn't accept that. I said she could. She said it was too much. I said a roof and a doctor aren't too much when you have the means to do it. I sent the money in 2 transfers, about 680,000 baht in total, which was just under 11,500 at the rate that week. The specialist fees, the travel, the roof repairs, a little extra for medication, and whatever else came up. I didn't think about it for very long. That's the truth. I thought about my own mother. I thought about what it would have meant if someone had just helped without making it a transaction, and I sent it. About 2 weeks later, something happened that I want to tell you about because I have thought about it many times since, and I handled it badly. I was on a Facebook group for Western expats in Chiang Mai. I joined it early on for practical information, visa questions, recommended mechanics, that sort of thing. I hadn't posted much. But one evening, I put up a photograph of the restaurant, just a nice shot of the front with the lanterns lit and the street behind it, and I wrote something like, happy to have found a place that feels like home. A private message came in the next morning from a man called Stuart, British, based on his profile, had been in Chiang Mai about 4 years. The message was careful, I'll give him that. He wasn't rude. He said he noticed I'd been spending a lot of time at that particular restaurant, said he knew the owner slightly, said he hoped things were going well, and then asked, just casually, he said, no offense meant, how long I'd known her, whether I'd sent any money yet, and whether I'd heard about the typical pattern with these situations. The typical pattern. Those 2 words. I read the message twice. I felt a flash of something that wasn't quite anger but was close to it. I felt a flash of something that wasn't quite anger but was close to it, the kind you feel when someone applies a general rule to a specific person and gets it wrong. I thought, this man doesn't know Knock. He knows a type he has decided she is, and he is applying it without evidence. That was fair, as far as it went. He didn't know her. What I did next was not fair, to myself or to Stuart. I didn't reply. I closed the message. And then I made a decision, not consciously, not formally, but a decision nonetheless, that Stuart and people like Stuart were coming from a place of cynicism that had nothing to do with my situation, and that paying attention to that kind of thinking would only poison something good. I never went back to the Facebook group after that. Looking back now, I wish I'd replied, not because Stuart was right, I still don't know if he was, but because the act of replying would have meant sitting with the question long enough to answer it. And sitting with the question was exactly what I was refusing to do. That was the warning. That was the moment. And I closed the window and went down to the restaurant for lunch. The thing that closed the door on any remaining caution happened about a week after that. I was at the table at the back where Maylee did her homework, helping her sound out some English words from a school worksheet. My Thai was still almost non-existent. Her English was 7-year-old English, careful, phonetic, very serious about the rules. We were working through the word umbrella, which she found unnecessarily complicated, and honestly, she had a point. Na came in from the kitchen and said something to Maylee, gently, and Maylee looked up at me and said something in Thai that I didn't understand. Nak looked slightly embarrassed. She said, "She call you Lung." It means like uncle, but not exactly. More like man who is family, but not father. Older person who care about you. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Is okay if she say this." I looked at Maylee, who was watching me with that serious, waiting expression, holding her pencil. I said it was fine. I meant it completely. And after that, every other consideration, Stuart's message, the money I'd sent, the questions I wasn't asking, it all moved to the back. Behind this, I was Lung. I was family to a 7-year-old girl who had lost her father at 4 years old, and there was nothing in the world that felt more important than being careful with that. That's when I stopped being a man having a relationship in Thailand and became a man who thought he had a future here. Those are different things. I know that now. The guest house idea came up the way the best ideas always do, not as a pitch, not as a plan, but as something said quietly and then left alone. We were sitting outside after the dinner service one evening, the street quiet, a couple of monks walking past in orange robes with their eyes down, and Knox said, almost to herself, not quite to me, that she had always thought about having somewhere small. Rooms to rent, nothing big. Just something of her own that was more stable than a restaurant. Something that could still be there if she got sick or if the restaurant had a bad year. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was looking at the street. I noted that too. I filed it. She mentioned it again about 2 weeks later, again in passing, again without it being directed at me. A family contact had land outside town, near San Kamphaeng, a village maybe 20 minutes east of Chiang Mai. An elderly relative who might be 20 minutes east of Chiang Mai. An elderly relative who might be willing to sell or lease at a reasonable rate. 4 rooms would be enough to start. A builder her cousin knew. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think some people watching this will assume she was manipulating me and I walked into a trap. And maybe that's true. But what I experienced was this. I started thinking about it myself before she ever asked me to. I started doing the maths in my own head. I started imagining it. That's important. She didn't pull me in. I walked toward it steadily, like a man who has decided where he's going. I did my research, that's what I told myself. I'm being careful. I'm being sensible. I'm not just handing money over. I sat with my laptop at the apartment, and I read about Thai property law for foreigners. And what I found was straightforward enough. Foreigners cannot own land in Thailand, full stop. You can own a condo unit, but land is different. Some people set up Thai companies to hold property, but that has its own complications and risks. The clean, simple version was, any business or property would have to be in Nak's name. She was Thai. That was just the law. I told myself this was not a red flag. I told myself it was simply the legal landscape of the country I was living in, and that working within it was a sign of good faith, not foolishness. I told myself I had been underground for 30 years, trusting the structural integrity of a coal seam I couldn't see and couldn't fully verify, and I'd done that on the basis of good engineering and trust in the men around me, and it had never killed me. That is, I know now, a very bad analogy, Coal seams don't have intentions. I transferred just under 23,000, about 1.38 million baht. The land contact cost, the builder's deposit, initial materials. She showed me the paperwork, which was in Thai. I couldn't read it. I asked her to explain the key points, which she did, patiently. I had no way to verify whether what she told me matched what the documents said. I trusted her. That was my entire due diligence. The building started in the second week. And this is where I should tell you about the construction site, because this is the part that felt most real to me, the part that felt most like I belonged there. I am a man who knows how to read a site. I know what good drainage looks like and what bad drainage looks like. I know when shuttering has been done properly and when it's going to give you problems later. I know the difference between a builder who is being careful and one who is cutting corners and hoping you don't notice. I walk that site every day. I ask the right questions. The builder, a man called Lek who spoke no English but understood the universal language of a man who knows what he's looking at, seemed to respect the fact that I wasn't just a pharaoh with money standing at the edge of the site taking photographs. I was in it. For the first time since the mine closed, I felt competent in a way that mattered. I felt like myself in that particular way, the Brendan who understood structures, who could look at a thing being built and know if it was right. Nock would come out in the evenings with 2 cans of Leo, and we'd stand together looking at what had gone up that day. And she'd ask questions about what I'd noticed, and I'd explain. She listened. She remembered. The next morning she'd say something to Lek, and I could see he'd adjusted something to Lek, and I could see he'd adjusted something based on what I'd said. I felt like a partner, that's the only word for it. I felt like mattered. I felt like myself in that what had gone up that day. I felt like myself in that propter. We moved in together during the construction, a practical decision, she said, since it would be sensible to have someone on site through the build and her apartment lease was coming up. I agreed. It was practical. I also agreed because I wanted to wake up in the same place as her and have breakfast together and walk the site in the morning before the builder arrived, and none of that was practical. All of that was something else entirely. I set up a monthly household transfer around this time. 15,000 baht, roughly Dakruf, roughly 400 for shared costs. Food, utilities, incidentals. I was emphatic with myself that this was not support. This was contribution. 2 people sharing a life share the costs of that life. That was how I framed it. The guest house opened in the 5th month. We called it Ban Nok, Nok's house in a sense, though Nok explained it as nest or home in the broader meaning. 4 rooms, clean, simply furnished. A small garden with a mango tree and a spirit house in the corner painted red and gold. It was modest. It was exactly what she'd described from the beginning. First month, 1 room rented 3 times, mostly Thai tourists on long weekends. About 4,500 baht total. Second month was marginally better. 2 rooms went more regularly. A young German couple stayed a week and left a good review online. I wasn't worried. These things take time. You don't open a business and fill it overnight. I knew that. The books were kept by Nok in a handwritten ledger. All Thai. One evening I asked to see them and she brought them out and laid them on the table, and I sat there with them for a few minutes. I could make out numbers. Dates. Not much else. Dates. Not much else. Dates. Not much else. I could have pushed. I could have said I need these translated. I need to understand what's coming in and what's going out. I didn't push. I looked at the ledger. I registered that I couldn't read it, and I said it looked fine and closed it. That is the sentence I return to most often when I'm walking in the mornings at Pi and I'm trying to understand what I did wrong. It looked fine, and I closed it. By month 3 of the guest house, I had started talking openly about the future in a way I hadn't done in years. A baby. Mali having a sibling. I'm 51 years old, and I know the biology of that isn't simple, and I know what people will think hearing a 51-year-old Irishman in Thailand talking about having a baby. But I'm telling you what was in my head, and I'm not going to dress it up. The word family had stopped feeling like something that belonged to other people. I said it out loud, and it didn't hurt. That was new. That was enormous, actually, for a man who had spent 2 years in a box room above a chipper with absolutely nothing to show for his life. One evening, I mentioned carefully that I had some savings back in Ireland. Not a number. Not the full picture. Just some savings. Enough that I wasn't worried about the near future. Knock nodded. Said that was good. I thought I was being cautious. I thought that old miner's instinct, keep something back, never put everything on one beam, was still working in my favor. I didn't understand that the information itself was enough. I didn't understand that some savings from a man who'd already transferred the equivalent of 2,000 translated very simply equivalent of 2,200, translated very simply into, there is more. I was the happiest I'd been in years. Whatever was true and whatever wasn't, I was standing in the garden of a small guest house in northern Thailand in the evening with the smell of frangipani and wood smoke in the air, and the sound of Meili laughing at something inside, and I was genuinely, completely happy. That's the last time I can say that without qualification. It was a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because I'd been into Sangkamphang to price some shelving timber for the guest rooms. Basic stuff, nothing urgent. But I wanted to get ahead of a few things before the dry season brought more bookings. The hardware place I used was closing early that day for some reason, a local holiday or a family thing. I never established which, so I was back at the guest house by 4:30 instead of 6. I heard her before I saw her. The kitchen door was open and she was on the phone, speaking Thai, and I registered two things simultaneously. The first was the speed of it. This wasn't her careful, considered English or the quiet Thai she used with Meili at bedtime. This was fast and loose and Lee at bedtime. The Thai of someone who has completely forgotten to perform anything for anyone. I had never heard her speak like that. In 10 months of being around this woman every day, I had never once heard her sound like that. The second thing was my own name. Brendan. Clear as anything. And then a run of Thai I couldn't follow, and then laughter. Not a polite laugh, a real one. I was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. She hadn't heard me come in. I stood there for perhaps 2 minutes. I didn't move. That's the minor in me. You don't announce yourself when something doesn't sound right. You stand still and you listen, and you read the shape of it first. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood enough. My name, said in a certain way, followed by a certain kind of laughter. I know what it sounds like when you are the subject of the conversation and not a participant in it. I went back outside. I sat on the step by the spirit house with its red and gold paint and its little offerings of jasmine and oranges, and I waited until I heard the call end. Then I went in and said I was back early and the timber place was closed. She said that was a shame. She made tea. We had dinner. I helped Meili with her English reading. Everything was completely normal. I waited until she was asleep. Then I sat at the small table near the window with my phone, and I did something I've never done before and hope never to do again. I tried to write down, phonetically, what I'd heard, the specific sounds, the approximate shape of the words. I got perhaps 30% of it, badly, partially, the way you might try to reproduce a piece of music you'd heard once by humming approximate notes. I put what I had into a translation app and ran it through. The returns were broken. Fragmented .I doesn't transliterate neatly, and my phonetic guesses were rough at best. But 2 pieces came back clear enough. The first was something close to, "He thinks we are going to have a baby. I told you he would think this." The second, later in the call, clearer in my memory because it had come at a moment of particular laughter, "I stay because of the house money. There is more." I read them both 3 times. For a few minutes I felt nothing. That's not unusual for me. I have always run on a slight delay when it comes to things that matter. The mind taught me that too, the sound of a problem overhead, and the several seconds before your body understands what your ears already know. Then, I felt everything. I sat with it for 3 days. I went about the mornings normally. Ko Tom, the site, small repairs, Meili's homework in the evenings. I watched knock across every meal and every conversation, and I looked for the person I thought I knew, and I kept finding her, which was the worst part. She was the same, careful, present, making the same small gestures of affection she always had. That was the most disorienting thing. There was nothing new to see. Whatever was true had always been true. I just hadn't been looking in the right direction. On the 3rd evening, after Meili was in bed, I asked Nak if she was happy. She said yes, without hesitating. I said, "Would you be happy without the money?" The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. I have replayed those 4 seconds many times. I watched her face in those 4 seconds, and what I saw was not guilt. Not exactly. It was more like a very quick, very subtle recalibration. The look of a person working out, rapidly and privately, what version of the truth is available to them in this moment, what they can say and what they cannot. She didn't answer. That was the answer. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse her of anything specific. I just nodded, slowly, and said I was tired and was going to bed. She said good night. I said good night. We slept in the same bed, and I stared at the ceiling and did what I do, assessed the roof, worked out my exits. Over the next 11 days I did things methodically. I found a lawyer through a post on a legal advice forum for expats in Chiang Mai, a Thai woman, Sharp, who charged 2,500 baht for a 1-hour consultation and told me, in about 15 minutes, everything I had suspected and more. The guest house was registered in Nak's name. The land was in Nak's name. My transfers were gifts, legally speaking, and gifts are not recoverable. My name appeared on nothing. There was nothing to fight for and nothing to claim. She was matter-of-fact about it, not unkind, but she had clearly given versions of this same consultation many times before, and had long since stopped being surprised by the circumstances that led men to her office. I packed over 2 evenings while Nook was at the restaurant. Not everything. I left some clothes, a few books, things that would have made it obvious. I packed what mattered. On the last morning, I came downstairs, and Maylee was at the back table with her school bag, eating toast, waiting for Nook to take her to school back, eating toast, waiting for Nook to take her to school. Nook was in the kitchen. I sat down across from Maylee, and I looked at her for a moment, this 8-year-old girl with her serious face and her school uniform and her complete ignorance of everything that had happened and was happening. I had bought her a book 3 weeks earlier, a picture book about animals, Thai and English side by side. I'd been saving it for her birthday. I got it out of my bag, and I put it on the table in front of her. She looked at it, looked at me. She said, in careful English, for me. I said, yes, for you. She held it with both hands and examined the cover with the solemnity she brought to everything, and I stood up and I left before Nock came back in from the kitchen. I cried on the bus north to Pai, not for long, just for the first 20 minutes, quietly, looking out the window at the rice fields and the mountains coming in from the east. Then I stopped, not because it was over, just because it was time to stop. Pai is a small town about 3 hours north of Chiang Mai by road, up in the mountains near the Myanmar border. The road to get there has over 700 curbs in it. They count them, apparently, and sell it as a feature. And the Songnehu I took dropped me on the main street in the early evening with my bag and no particular plan. The air was cooler than Chiang Mai, noticeably cooler. It smelled of wood smoke and something flowering that I couldn't name. I found a guest house near the night market that charged 350 baht a night, which is about €8, and I took a room, and I lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling and thought, right. Here we are then. That was 6 weeks ago. I'm still here. I want to tell you what 6 weeks in Pai looks like for a man in my situation, because I think people will assume the worst, and I want to be accurate. I am not drinking heavily. I'm telling you that plainly because it's the assumption and it's wrong. I have a beer some evenings, a Singha or a Chang, sitting outside whatever place is quiet enough to think in. That's it. I'm eating, I'm sleeping. I walk in the mornings before the heat comes in, up along the ridge above town where you can see the valley and the mist sitting in it, and I walk for an hour or so without any particular destination, and I think that's the routine. It's not recovery exactly. It's more like the absence of immediate crisis, which, after the last year, is something. Now let me tell you what I actually lost, because I think you deserve the honest accounting. Motorbike, tometer, motherbike, tometer 4,200, mother's medical and roof costs, tometer 500, guest house investment, tometer 500. Guest house. Monthly household transfers over roughly 8 months, approximately 3,200 in total. Small things, Maylee's school things, a uniform, tutoring, another few hundred on top of that. The total comes to somewhere around 42,000. That leaves me with just over 58,000 of Packy's money still in my Irish account. Plus whatever pension entitlements I've accumulated over the years, which I can access in the right circumstances at the right age. I am not ruined. I want to say that clearly. I am diminished, but I am not ruined. The thing that saved me, and I've thought about this carefully, was that I never told her the full amount. I mentioned some savings. I never said a number. That old instinct, the one the mind put in me 30 years ago, never put everything on one beam, never give the ceiling everything you have. Keep something back. That instinct, operating almost without my knowledge, kept 58,000 in an Irish account she never knew existed in full. It's the only smart thing I did, and I didn't even do it consciously. I just couldn't quite bring myself to say the number out loud. Now I want to say something about Nock, because I think it matters, and because I'm trying to be fair. I don't believe she felt nothing for me. I don't believe it was pure performance from the first day. I think, and I could be wrong, I'll never know for certain, I think she probably told herself the arrangement was fair. She gave me companionship, she gave me warmth and routine, and someone to have breakfast with, and a child who called me Lung. I gave her security and a future and a guest house that is now, legally, entirely hers. That is, if you squint at it a certain way, more or less what marriages have always been. 2 people trading what they have for what they need. The difference is consent. I consented to a love story. I didn't consent to a transaction. And whatever she told herself, whatever she felt She knew the difference between those two things, and she didn't tell me which one we were in. That's the thing I come back to on the morning walks. And then there's Maylee. Whatever else was complicated or calculated or unclear, Maylee was 8 years old, and she called me Lung, and she ate biscuits with great solemnity, and she struggled with the word umbrella, and she had no idea, not one single idea, what was happening or why I disappeared one morning without explanation. That is not something I can make sit neatly. I don't try, I just carry it. I miss her. I'm saying that out loud because it's true and because I think it's the most important part of this whole story. Not the money, not the guest house, not even Knock. I miss a child who thought of me as family and who I walked away from without being able to explain why, and who will probably grow up thinking I just stopped caring. That is the part that stays. So, what do I do now? I genuinely don't know. I'm 51 years old. I have money. I have time. I have no particular reason to go back to a box room and boil, and every reason not to. I might stay in Thailand. There are parts of this country I haven't seen yet, and I'm not ready to decide that the whole thing was a mistake based on one chapter of it. Twant might go home for a while. I might do something else entirely that I haven't thought of yet. What I won't do is pretend I wasn't fooled. I was. By someone who was, I think, partly genuine and partly very deliberate. And the two things were so mixed together that I couldn't separate them then, and I'm not entirely sure I can now. And I won't tell you that a careful man can't be fooled, because I was careful. I was slower than most. I did my research. I noticed the hesitations and I filed them. I kept something back. And still, here I am, in a guest house in Pai, with 42,000 less than I arrived with, and a child's face in my memory that I can't do anything about. The most dangerous situation isn't the one that feels wrong from the start. It's the one that feels right for a long time, because enough of it was. I'll sit in Pai a while longer. The mountains here don't ask anything of you. That's all I need for now. That's Brendan's story. Here, this is Thailand. We've covered a lot of ground over the years. Bar scenes and visa disasters and businesses that collapsed and men who lost everything to someone they'd known for a fortnight. Brendan's story is different from most of them. In one important respect, he lost 42,000 to someone he knew well, over a long time, in circumstances that looked, from the outside and from the inside, like the real thing. He didn't lose his money to a scam. He lost it to hope. And the distinction matters, because you can learn to spot a scam. Hope is harder. What Brendan actually grieves, and he'll tell you this if you ask him directly enough, isn't the money. It's the future he built carefully in his head over 10 months, and it's a small girl with a serious face who called him something kind in Thai and doesn't know why he left. If you're watching this from Thailand, or thinking about coming, we're not telling you not to love someone here. We're telling you to build slowly. Keep your name on paper where paper matters. Understand what you're consenting to before you consent to it. Because warmth is real in this country. Loneliness is real everywhere. And the gap between them, that particular gap, where a lonely man meets genuine warmth and can't quite tell how much of it is just for him, that's where the money goes. If you have a story of your own, you know where to find us. This is Thailand. We'll see you next time.